So guys, over the years I've run across all these different techniques for making pork crackling. And I'll say I am no rookie at making crispy pork, but then again, sometimes they just don't come out the way I intended. I want to master this. So, the art of crispy pork. Where to begin? Well, since you're here watching this video, I reckon you might have come across videos of people removing the pork skin and treating it in various ways, deep frying it to make a huge kind of cracker of pork. This is cool and all, but what I want to do is to make the perfect roast. This means that the skin has to stay attached to the meat at all times. This also means that the meat should be something you'd want to eat after achieving the crispy skin, because crispy pork skin is easy if you achieve it with no care for the juiciness of the meat inside. And lastly, it should be something that can be done in the comfort of your home. With all of this in mind, I decided to start at the easiest level I could imagine, going with a pork knuckle. Since this cut of pork is very tough and full of connective tissue and fat, which means that the meat not only can take a real beating, but also that it's kind of required if you want to be able to eat it, this left me a lot of headspace for treating the skin. So, how do people achieve crispy pork skin? Salt is always used, as it draws out moisture from the skin. Moisture that prevents the skin from crisping up. Some sort of physical manipulation of the skin is usually done. In Europe, this is often done by scoring the skin one way or another. Whereas I've noticed that they poke many little holes in the skin in Asia. This is done to increase the rate at which fat and moisture is rendered out of the skin. Then some sort of quick boiling or blanching of the skin. This breaks down the protein structures called collagen in the skin. The pork crackling snacks you've seen are made this way, by boiling strands of skin until they are tender enough to break by pinching them. Then they are slowly dried out and then deep fried, making them puff up almost like popcorn. The idea is that you try and mimic this with the skin on your roast. This is much more difficult because you can't necessarily boil your roast for many hours in the same way, but you can go as far as possible, and then dry out the skin by slowly roasting it in the oven. Then to get your crackling to pop in the end, you want to give it intense heat. If everything has gone the way you hoped for, you should end up with nice and crispy crackling. If not, the skin is either rock hard or more chewy than crispy. And then I've seen that at least in China, they often use vinegar. I'm not completely sure what this does, but my theory is that the vinegar as an acid breaks down some of the collagen structures we talked about before, making the skin less tough. Please let me know in the comments if I've missed something here. Also, if there's some technique that you know about that I've missed, please share in the comments as well. Instead of blanching the skin, I decided that it would be a good idea to try and use sous vide instead. I also brushed the skin with vinegar before I put it in the bag. If the idea behind the vinegar indeed is to break down the collagen, why not give it a lot of time to do so, and at a temperature where it does this more efficiently. I decided that poking holes would suit this cut better than cutting it with a knife, and I figured that if the reason for poking the skin is to allow it to render better, then I can poke the holes at any time before the rendering process, right? Therefore, I thought to myself that it would be a good idea to poke it after the sous vide, when the skin would be nice and soft. Anyways, I gave the knuckle no less than 8 hours at 86 Celsius or 187 Fahrenheit, which is about as high as water goes before it starts to get a bit rowdy. Removing it from the bag, I was happy to see that the skin had become very soft and gelatinous, although it had unfortunately split in the front, which was not optimal. While sous videing the knuckle, I had wondered whether the vinegar would affect the flavor too much doing it this way, but I was happy to find out that there was only a very subtle and in some ways pleasant fragrance of vinegar. I also noticed that the meat was still pretty tough and in no state to be eaten, which I thought was okay, since I was nowhere near done cooking this thing. Now that the skin was nice and soft, I poked a lot of holes in it with a fork, and then I left it in the fridge overnight. This was to make the now boiled and broken down skin become nice and dry. Before putting it in the fridge, I gave it another brushing of vinegar and a nice coating of salt. It ended up spending 2 nights in the fridge, which I only thought was a good thing. Taking it out of the fridge after a couple of nights, I noticed that the skin had become much drier, and also that fat had continued seeping out of the many holes, creating these blobs of solid fat. I thought that they would melt away once in the oven, so I didn't do anything about them. Now all I needed was to render down the skin as much as possible for it to become ready for the last part. Before putting it in the oven at around 90 Celsius or 195 Fahrenheit, I gave it one more brushing of the vinegar. I was not sure how long it would take the skin to become ready at this temperature, so I decided to just check in on it and give it the time it needed. After around 4 hours, I checked in on it, and something had definitely changed. I wouldn't say it was ready, as I wanted the skin to become hard, what some people call glass-like, which usually means it's ready to crisp up. I decided to give it another 4 hours. When I checked in again, it was much more like I wanted, with the skin nice and hard. It was also obvious that a lot of fat and collagen had rendered out. I decided that now was the time, and I removed the knuckle from the oven and cranked the heat up to around 250 Celsius or 480 Fahrenheit. Once the oven was fully up to temperature, I placed the knuckle back in and sat back as I watched and wondered whether all of this work would be for nothing. At first, I didn't think much was happening, and it made me kind of worried. But then after a few minutes, some small bubbles started appearing. And then more and more appeared as it began looking very much like a success. When I removed the knuckle after 15 minutes, I unfortunately found out that it had not puffed up in the same manner on the backside. Thinking it had something to do with uneven convection in my oven, I decided to put it back in the oven, making the unpuffed side face out this time. I also lowered the temperature to around 210 Celsius or 410 Fahrenheit to avoid burning the parts that were already nice and bubbly. This, however, didn't help much, and I decided to go with it the way it was. Though it didn't puff up, this side was still extremely crispy, and it mattered little. In fact, it was very clear that the skin was very crispy, but it wasn't until I squeezed it with my hand, hearing this deep and satisfying crunch, that I understood just how well this had turned out. Overall, I was extremely happy with the results, but there was still one very important issue to address. How was everything underneath this beautiful exterior? I held my breath as I decided to try and do a bone pull. When the bone came out clean, I could sigh in relief, as that usually means you've nailed it. Once I opened it, I found out that I was indeed right. Though I kind of wished I had nailed all of the skin on this one, I was pretty satisfied with it. And as you can see, I couldn't stop eating it. It was extremely delicious, and the crackling had a subtle hint of the vinegar that suited it very well. The meat was succulent and tender, and I had a hard time remembering the last time I had pork this good. This was of course not the most difficult roast to make, and I will have to try and apply this technique to more difficult cuts of pork. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. It's greatly appreciated. And also, you might like some of my other videos. I'll make sure to have YouTube recommend the video things you'd enjoy the most. Take care.